Meeting of the Governance Committee to order. Start with a roll call. Councilor Tabor,
Present.
Councilor Lombardi,
Here.
and Councilor Cook. I'm here. This morning we are discussing a potential charter amendment, and so we have invited former city mayors to join us and to share their views on that. And we've also invited Councilor Denton to present this morning. He is the one who suggested the initial charter amendment at a city council meeting, and it was referred to governance. So thank you, Councilor Denton, for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. So I proposed 3 different ideas for charter amendment. The city council would only be able to pick one of them. If we do decide to go that route to place in front of the voters at the upcoming municipal election, all 3 of them have to deal with essentially our form of government. It's been on, I won't say on the back burner, but a number of people have discussed potentially voting on something along these lines, and it has to deal with either or both, whether we have ward-specific representation and how the mayor is elected. So the way we currently do it, and obviously we have numerous mayors in the room, so you know how this is done, how it's all at large, and the top vote getter becomes mayor, and the second top vote getter becomes assistant mayor. The 2 other systems which I want to simply be considered by this committee and then the city council, one is the way how Concord does it, where they have several ward-specific city councilors, so 1 per ward. Then they have several at-large city councilors, and the top vote getter from the at-large race becomes mayor. So it's essentially a hybrid system. If Portsmouth was to adapt that, there would be 5 specific ward city councilors, and then out of the number who run for the 4 at-large seats, the one who got the most votes would become mayor, and the one who got the second most votes would become assistant mayor. An alternative system that we could consider would be the way how Dover does it. Dover has both ward-specific city councilors, and they have at-large city councilors, but they also have the direct election of mayor. And then the third option would be just having the direct election of mayor. Again, to be honest, I don't know how I would vote if it was placed in front of me as a voter come November 2023, but I would like to see something presented to the voters just because it's been discussed for so long. Should we consider another form of government? With that said, I don't think we should move forward with the whole hog Dover approach. I think it's better to do a step increase, because the more changes at once that you try to make, the less likely it is to succeed. So if we were going to consider something, my recommendation would be the ward specific for the 5 wards, city councilors, the 4 at large, and then top vote getter remains mayor, and the second top vote getter would be assistant mayor. But that's my preference out of the 3. I simply wanted to get the conversation going, because ever since I've been involved, from when I first ran in 2013, some wards have felt underrepresented, primarily wards 3 and 4. And then this current council, I believe there's 4 city councilors in Ward 2. In the previous council, there were 5 councilors from Ward 5. And not every ward always feels like they're represented, and it's just by chance and who runs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Denton. I'm going to turn it over to our city attorney to give us some advice on charter amendments in general and this process.
Sure. The charter, of course, is sort of the constitution of the city. It is, in fact, a state law, or the level of a state law, and it describes how the government in Portsmouth operates. In New Hampshire, there are a number of recognized forms of government, of which council manager is one, recognized by statute. It is what our charter as implemented. There are other forms of government. The obvious one, and probably the only one that might be the sort of thing the committee would want to consider, is a Board of Aldermen and Mayor form of government. And the difference, and they have that in Nashua, for example, and the difference between the two is that in a Board of Aldermen Mayor form of government, the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city. And whereas in a council manager form of government, the manager is the chief executive officer of the city. The importance of considering those different forms of government is, among other things, procedural. There are two ways that charters can be amended under state law in New Hampshire. And the first is that charters can be revised. Any change in the form of government is a revision. Charters can also be amended. Every change other than a revision is an amendment. The processes are dramatically different. To revise the charter, at a very minimum, a charter commission needs to be created. They need to conduct a study. They have to issue a report. And ultimately, there would be a referendum vote on whatever the charter commission might recommend or not recommend. But that all considers changing the form of government. The items that Councilor Denton has discussed are amendments, not revisions. They don't change the form of government. They would simply amend the existing council manager form that we have. The process is much simpler. Charter amendments can be initiated either by citizens, by a petition approach, or by the city council following the fairly expedient process of simply taking a vote. If the vote suggests an amendment, that amendment has to be referred to 3 state agencies, Revenue Administration and the Attorney General's Office and the Secretary of State. And if those 3 agencies approve of the proposed amendment, then it would be placed upon a ballot for a referendum vote. And in every case, any change in a charter of any kind calls for a referendum vote at an election. As I said, the items suggested by Councilor Denton would all be amendments, could be initiated by the council acting on its own. That would be the simplest way to do it. And there are a lot of timelines involved in this, including the state agencies having something like 45 days to conduct their review. So probably the important thing to know is that if the city council wanted to proceed with any of these charter amendments or anything similar to it, they really need to have to begin this fairly early into the next year, into 2023, in order to be sure to have plenty of time to accomplish all the steps necessary and get the question on the ballot. There's no doubt in my mind that the first test which applies to any change in the charter is it allowed by state law? Though both of the proposals discussed by Councilor Denton, I think, rather easily get over that hurdle and pass that test.
Thank you, City Attorney. Appreciate that. I'm going to open this up to discussion. Again, the committee reached out and invited former mayors to come and join us because of their unique perspective on this particular issue. I know that it has come up repeatedly, so they've encountered it themselves through discussions. And so I'm going to first open the floor to our former mayors and let them share insight. Today we have Mayors Blaylock, Mayors Verini, and Mayor Spear here, all former mayors of the city, and I really appreciate you coming and taking the time to spend with this committee this morning to share your insights. Clearly, we couldn't invite our current sitting mayor because we would create a quorum of the council, which we didn't want to do. And he would have a vote as well on this item. So we appreciate getting the perspective of our mayors on this. So would any one of you like to speak first?
I'll opine.
Thank you.
I'll give you my opinion on the ward concept for, first as a voter and then as a counselor. You know, right now when I'm a voter and I go in there and I have to choose up to 9 from possibly 18 on a good year of candidates, I know that I can probably select a good half dozen candidates, because if you can't choose people from 18 candidates, there's probably something wrong with you, but anyway, you get some good people out of that mix. And I leave the voting booth knowing that I probably voted for a good bunch of people. There's been, we know possibly with the downside risk of having ward counselors is that sometimes there aren't going to be good choices. And I know that because state rep is like that. And there's been years in the past when you walk into the booth and you have a choice of one, because there's only one person running for state rep in your ward. And that's kind of frustrating. So I'd hate to see, and the same thing would happen with the council races, unfortunately. So I'd hate to see that. I like having more choice as a voter. Now, as a counselor, being on that side of the table, when issues come before me as a counselor, sometimes they impact one particular area more than others, just because whether we're doing a public works project or there's a zoning change or a road change, I'm always cognizant of how it impacts those people, because look, we're human, we all want to get reelected, and there's a voter who voted for me in that area, and I want to make sure that I'm serving their interests as best I can. I know that it's human nature. If we go to a ward system and I'm from my ward and there's an issue happening in some other area of the city, I mean, you might care as a human being that it's great that you want to do the right thing, but really, from an animal instinct standpoint, they can't vote for you. They can't influence your outcome in any way. And so you might, if it's a budget issue, you might vote against it to save money, or you might, it doesn't have the way representation works, voters make policy, it doesn't work that way if you have these counselors voting on issues that aren't in their ward. That relationship is broken. And so I think having everyone at large, everyone is responsible to every voter in the city on every issue, because they're all Portsmouth-wide issues we deal with as counselors. I think that relationship between the voter and the policymaker needs to be continued and not broken by balkanizing us into factions of wards. That being said, this has, as we talked about, this has come up in the past, and I want to suggest a way forward when these issues come up, and I can use a good example of that. In the past, we were looking at capital improvement spending, and some neighborhoods felt that they were not getting the dollars the dollars were not being distributed fairly across the city. So, in fact, Cliff Lazenby, who later became a counselor, did some analysis on it and came up with some charts and other tables to help the council and the city see where dollars might be more evenly distributed across the city. And to me, when we're talking about, all these different neighborhoods or different wards getting fair representation in the city, to me, that's where the council and the administration should focus, is say, okay, beyond the legalese of the charter amendment, what are the issues that people feel they're being neglected? Let's tackle those issues. Let's focus on that and try to solve, because usually they have legitimate gripes, legitimate issues that, and the ward thing is kind of a way to get at what they're really feeling is the stressor. And so let's say, okay, I heard you about the ward thing, but let's really solve your problem, whatever those problems are. In the past, it was the capital spending, and maybe there's some other issues coming up now that really the council, let's hone in on that and try to solve their problems and do it as all at-large members. So I just wanted to give you that perspective as having served on the council.
Thank you.
I'll chime in. Thanks, Mayor Spear. I have to say I agree a lot with what Eric Spear just said. First of all, when you run, at large, you are representing all the citizens in the whole city. One thing I did when in my first term was we had each ward represented by a counselor, even though he did not live in that ward. And the reason I think that's not important, that you live in the ward that you are the liaison to, and it was something simply that would go to the neighborhood committee meetings, and because the wards are not drawn with some sort of idea-specific, it's a political map. So, I like to avoid at all costs politicizing too much our local elections. I always thought one of the beautiful things about running at large and the way we do it is very nonpartisan. And you do have to indeed represent the city. And some of us have lived in more than one ward, but it's important that it's a small community area-wise, and we don't have that big a population either. And I think it's been working quite well. Every now and then you get an ineffective council, but it can always be corrected because it is every 2 years. But I think the way to do it is to emphasize to the council in general that each area of the city is important, and to not draw some sort of political line to create any kind of bastion of power, I guess you might say. But I know that sometimes you do get more councilors from one ward, but I don't really think more gets done there public works-wise, because that's probably the genesis of most of the complaints is we want sidewalks, how come they're getting them? The downtown's always getting slandered because there's more focus, but then again, that's also the economic engine, and there's more going on, and that's the crossroads. There's always an explanation or a reason for the way we do things. The paving streets program, that they periodically have to grade which streets need to be done first, and it's not because some councilor in some ward wanted his streets done first. So I think leaving the at-large city council in general is probably the best idea.
Excuse me, Kate, Rick's online and he has.
Oh.
Just wanted you to be aware that it doesn't say Rick, but it's the one with the hand up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. If possible, yes. Former Mayor Beckstead, have you joined us? Yes, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to spare you video because I see that everyone in the room is dressed fairly for colder weather, and I'm going to spare you from where I'm at, calling from Florida, where it's 80-some degrees. So I wanted to chime in. Yes, Councilor Cook called me the other day. Wasn't sure exactly where we'd be at, but I have the ability right now with this time to be able to go and just share my thoughts. I agree with both Mayor Blaylock and Mayor Spears. I'm probably going to assume, I don't want to assume, I know that this has come up many, many times and shared with many councils, and I know that Mayor Lister was one also. I like the simple fact that you have to earn a vote across the entire city. I believe and agree with Councilor Blaylock as well, that divide. I still think we get into when it comes to a partisan election. My own opinion is I think that happened the last time around, but regardless of that, I think it's important for every member of the council, all 9 of them, we are one individual of each one of them to represent all the wards. We don't need that type of divide. I think it works well. I think it worked for this council that is there now. Councilor Denton has been on a few councils in the past. He's been elected every time basically on the same thought. I know talking to people over the many years that I've gone and run, that people like the system that we have. It is a short-lived term. It is 2 years. Things can happen dramatically within those 2 years. But I think it's a fair system the way that we have it now, and I think that the voters and the residents, if this was even put to a vote, would clearly say that we like the system, not to get bogged down with other things. And I agree with what we have now, and I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know that you were away on vacation. I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mayor Farini?
Thanks. And Rick, I appreciate that you're not showing us your Hawaiian shirt and so forth. That's very nice and kind of you. Because it would be
The
irritating.
Hawaiian thing is Jack's, not mine.
That's true, isn't it? It would be irritating.
Purposely didn't wear it.
You know, I'd add a similar perspective, but a couple of other thoughts. You know, one interesting thing to consider is Rick, Steve Marchand, me, and Bob Lister aren't from wards 2 or 5. Okay? So that's an example of the fact that, yes, in a given election, you might see one ward, you know, rock it out and do really well. But over time, if you consider that, how many mayors? I can't count. That was 4. We weren't from wards 2 or ward 5. And so one might say, well, okay, everybody's in ward 2 or ward 5. And that's in fact not the case. You know, I could sit here and text somebody in Texas that I have a case with, and they can text me back. So I really don't feel that proximity to a ward in today's, you know, world of communication is all that necessary. I do appreciate the good intent, and I think people want to have representation. They want to feel comfortable with their representation. But I'll give you a few thoughts from Dover and Rochester. My law firm's in Dover, and they have ward voting, and they have a mayoral election. To a certain extent in Dover, the wards have had races that are not contested. So I think when you have ward elections, and we'll talk about the mayor thing in a minute, it's a good way to have fewer people involved in the system. And the reason it is, in Rochester in particular, they have a number of uncontested races. So the dual problem you have is you get that one person in the ward who mows it down and wins that every time. It makes it harder for someone to run in that ward because it's your neighbor and it's harder and you don't get elected. Or you have the other challenge of 2 really good people who run in that ward. And you think, boy, I want both of them on the council. And only one of them gets elected. So I think Rochester, you can actually go back and look at the data. I was speaking with their former mayor, TJ Jean, back in time about how that went. And they had like numerous uncontested races. So what you're actually doing is stifling an opportunity for people to participate. When I hear people say there's been talk about this, I am not aware of that as being a massive political movement. You hear people mention it once in a while for the very reason Eric stated, which is frustration with spending in a given ward. And I think that's a perfectly appropriate and legitimate thing. But as Jack said, you can handle that in the CIP, and there are ways that you can do that. I think to think about the mayoral issue, because no one's really spoken about that, I offer you this to consider, and I've seen this happen in Dover. Dover right now has a mayor that's very popular, and Bob Carey's a nice guy. There have also been mayoral elections where 2 or 3 really good people ran. 2 of them you're not going to see on the council. So if someone has the wherewithal and the political interest and the passion to be a mayor, and then 2 of them don't get elected, the citizens lose the opportunity to have them as representatives. I see no benefit in that. And I think in the city of Portsmouth, I would be even more vehemently opposed, in particular on the mayor and to a mayor-only race, and I'll tell you why. Because currently, if you end up as mayor, and God help you if you do, you have to earn it all the way around the horn. If you have a race, think about the Portsmouth we all know and love. Are there people in Portsmouth who might want to be mayor because it's a really cool thing? And might that create a real arms race in a political campaign that is naturally dissipated and deadened by the system that we have now? So I think it's for twofold. It's a reason that you have to get out there, and that mayor, 2 mayors who run against each other, they don't have to go to Ward 3. They don't have to do that. If you look at who wins the top 3 seats, usually they're winning in 3 and 4 and 5 wards, and there's a reason for that. So that tells me that the communication pattern is there, or those votes wouldn't be offered. It is a well-intended thing, and it sounds good that I would have my ward councilor, and I think it's a nice idea, but I think in practice It just lessens the opportunity for the public to have representation. It gets more people out of the system politically, as opposed to having more people in the system politically. And I have never, in my experience in 8 years of doing it, if somebody called me with a pothole from Ward 3, it's no different than from Ward 1 or Ward 4. It's a pothole, and you got to deal with it. And there are bigger issues. I do like this, and I remember when Cliff Lazenby brought that forward, and I would say to a sitting council, absolutely look at the neighborhoods and say, where's the money being spent? I think that's a great idea. That can even be institutionalized, as a matter of fact. And of course, as others said, if you have significant infrastructure in the downtown, you're obviously going to have higher costs. But if you say, what's that base infrastructure cost that the downtown and out to Islington gives us, and you zero that out and say, okay, that's a set piece, and then look at spending proportionately throughout the wards, I think you can balance it up, and you can think about how to do your progressive spending on the CIPs and that sort of thing. So I think there's an easy way to account for that. We spend more in the downtown because, now that said, if I see period lighting again anywhere, you'll see me at City Hall. And how many times have any of you seen me at City Hall speaking in the last 10 years? Probably not at all. So I think the way to do it is to balance it up by taking the fixed costs of downtown, look at the 5 wards, and do that. And I do think it's an interesting discussion. I do think getting the data from towns like Rochester, where you say, my God, that person was a councilor forever, and they were starting to grow lichens. Is that really in anyone's best interest? So I think it's an interesting discussion. It might be a solution in search of a problem. And again, I can appreciate the frustration that happens for people of any ward when you get elected, you got a bunch of people from one ward, and that unicorn happens. But I think over time, I don't think that's what it shows. And I think just the mayors, where do the mayors come from? That kind of shows you where the bulk of the votes go. And I think the current system has been effective. But that's, I think, the answer to people who say we need to have ward voting, and say, well, let's talk about what that really means. So good luck. I don't have to do it.
Thank you. Yes.
Additional comment on the mayor only or the mayor separate election. So it would change the chemistry of the way the city council is. So really the mayor is really just a city councilor that has 3 extra responsibilities. Now granted, some of those responsibilities add a little bit more oomph to your what you bring to the table. And that's bringing forward appointments, helping to set the agenda, and chairing the meeting. And the advantage to being assistant mayor is you don't have to do any of the first 2 things, but every now and then you get to chair a meeting. It's sort of it's a wonderful thing to be the mayor of Portsmouth. I truly treasure it. I mean, to be elected mayor out of an at-large group in the city that you were born and raised in is truly remarkable. But I don't think I would have changed anything about the way it happened. And when I say it would change the chemistry, if we elected mayors separately, it does change the chemistry of the way the mayor interacts with the city council, because it separates, he's the top dog. City manager would still be the chief executive officer and hire all the employees and make sure the things get done. But I would be afraid of it changing the chemistry. I like the fact that as mayor, I was really just a city councilor. I got to vote last. I was assistant mayor under Tom Farini, and I had to vote first. So
I was assistant mayor under you. It's all getting dim.
That would have been interesting.
It would have.
But so anyway, I guess my point is, and of course I'm one of those people that I don't embrace change unless something's broken, and I don't see that it's broken. Like I said earlier, every now and then you get an ineffective council, but that's going to happen anyway. And the fear of having lifers on the council representing one ward, and whether they get a lot more done or not, I don't see the advantage. So. Thank you.
No, thank you. Is there anything else from our former mayors? No? Let me share here that I have spoken also with former Mayor Weeks, and I heard from former Mayor Marchand, and both expressed similar thoughts and said that they would be willing to come at another time if we have another session. So thank you. I'm going to open up discussion to the rest of the group here. Please feel free to chime in. counselors. Also, our city clerk, welcome to share your thoughts if you would like as well. Yes, Councilor Lombardi.
Yes, I thought the comments were great from our past mayors, all past mayors. I tend to agree with them. I agree that dividing the city into wards politically or politicizes the process. Also, if you look at the numbers of voters per ward, and we had around, I believe, 6,000 voters. And so that gives you just over 1,000 people in a ward voting for a person. So you have to touch a lot of people when you're running at large, and that's great. I think it's great. If I had to touch 300 people to get elected or 400 people to get elected, I would feel that I was not being elected by the city. So that's my counselor side thing. As a resident, I'm in Ward 2, and so I'm in one of the wards that has multiple counselors at this time. But I just don't feel like I'm representing just the group of people in my neighborhood at all. It's not part of the ethic of Portsmouth. I think of Portsmouth as a city as a whole. And I'd be concerned, I'd have the same concerns that were brought up about having stagnant people on the council. And also losing some good people that could be on the council, especially in the mayoral race. If, as I believe I think all people said, if you run for mayor and you take, I don't know, 3, 4, even 5 people running for mayor, you lose some really qualified people, perhaps, that could be on the city council. I did take some time and talked with a number of constituents, and yes, there are some times when people feel ignored mostly because of the CIP. And why isn't this project done? Why is this one waiting, And I think that can be solved in another way, as you said. So, in all, I think the system is good. I think there are better solutions to whatever perceived problems there are in terms of representing the whole city equally. So I guess I'm hesitant to move any change forward. That's just my opinion, though. But thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Tabor.
Thanks, Councilor Cook. I was trying to think of any way that I could be the devil's advocate on this, but I can't really. Having heard the lived experience of all 4 mayors, I think Councilor Denton proposed this because we've had a pattern of some wards being underrepresented, or maybe some wards overrepresented, 2 and 5. Well, 2 and 5 are the largest in vote count, and they're also where people turn out the most. So that's just the nature of the city elections. I share the concern about a dearth of candidates if we go to ward elections, and somebody only having to maybe win over 600 votes or 700 votes and becoming entrenched. I think those smaller ward races could become partisan, and the registration is so lopsided in Portsmouth, that might not be a fair outcome if it got partisan. I really think all of us who run, if we want to get elected to the council, we have to go see everybody in every ward. We have to learn every ward. We have to learn their issues. We have to go out door to door. And so I think the current system we've got makes all of us as candidates actually get out of our parochial neighborhood and see the whole city. And particularly when you get to CIP and neighborhood issues which come up to the council, we're forced to inform ourselves about every part of the city, and I think that's good. And the last thing I'd say is, I think the current system we've got responds quickly to the electorate. This last race, there were 1,695 new voters, and they elected a council that was significantly younger. If we had ward representation, all those new voters were turned out, but they could only have affected 4 seats. So I think what we've got responds to what the voters are doing on Election Day. And I think there's a good mix, in this last race. My voters were different than, say, Mayor McEachern's voters, and in the previous council, my voters were very different than, say, some of the other councilors. But that's good. Councilor Denton has a constituency about sustainability and the environment, and that's good for the future of the city. So I like the system we've got for those reasons.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Denton.
I agree with the overwhelming majority of everything that was said, and I appreciate all the thought that went into it. And my preference, if this committee was to refer anything back to the council, again, would be for the version which Concord has, which keeps the mayor being selected from a group of at-large versus direct election of the mayor. And again, the reason why I brought this forward was for voters to have the opportunity to make this decision in November. It might be an overwhelming decision against it, but just give them the opportunity to, for once, have that option.
Yes.
I'd like to thank Councilor Denton for putting the ball in play and having the discussion. One thing I haven't heard is why this would make things better. I'm curious about that. Not the idea that it theoretically should be there for us to consider, but is there a public policy outcome that's going to be better for the voters of Portsmouth as a result of doing that? You have a lot of guts to even put it in play, and I think that's great. I don't understand what the reason is, other than it's something we talked about. And so maybe it should show up on a ballot. I'm not going to weigh in one way or the other, and the council will exact its wisdom. But I think that if it does get to a ballot, if I were a city councilor, I would want to hear a lot of reasons why it's going to make things better, not just that it's something we should talk about.
Are there any other thoughts, group? In that case, I will share mine. I truly appreciate all the insights that we've heard here today. And I agree that our system isn't broken. I don't feel a need to alter the system, but I think we should recognize that there are some challenges and concerns around things like the budget and spending, that maybe we could find other solutions to those challenges, making sure that we have reports on the CIP that break down spending by ward might be a good first step, as far as I'm concerned, into addressing some of those concerns about making sure wards are represented. Also, the potential solution of having individual counselors representing wards that they may be not elected from, but at least assigned to a ward to attend the neighborhood meetings so that we make sure we're getting reports back. We've also already put in place some other provisions that help, I think could help solve some of these concerns around inequity. For example, having public dialogue out in the neighborhoods and in the wards so that people feel like they have access to the council outside of City Hall. I think there is one other concern around voting that maybe we should also consider addressing, and it's inequity when it comes to running for the council, who can afford to run for the council. You know, a lot of times representation, the reason we don't have representation from certain wards is that people don't have the time to serve. It's very difficult. It's a lot of hours that you're giving up to serve on the council. And some neighborhoods have a lot of individuals who work evening shift who can't potentially serve on the council for that reason. So we might not see as much representation from some of those wards. And we also won't see representation a lot of times in families with young children. So we have to think about making sure we have good representation for all those individuals in the city who can't necessarily come to city council to express their concerns. And I don't think that ward voting necessarily solves that problem, because again, you might get the one individual in that neighborhood who's willing to run and put in that time commitment, and that person could serve for many, many years without opposition in voting. And so there really isn't a choice for that ward besides in the at-large race. So we have to find other solutions around that. We also have to find other solutions to an increasingly expensive city council race for those individuals who cannot always afford to raise the funds. You know, it's not easy to come up with $1,000 or more. Printing signs is expensive. There's an increasing number of signs for each council race. It's becoming more and more expensive for individuals to run. So we have to be thinking about also making access to elections and running for city council available to everyone in the city. I don't know what the solution is there, but it's something that we can consider. So with that said, I personally wouldn't support a change, but I think that we need to find other solutions to some of these challenges around inequity in the city. Are there any other comments before we move forward? Okay. The next item on our agenda is discussion of further charter review process. I placed this here because I wanted everybody to know that this isn't the last time we're going to talk about the charter as the governance committee, that there are probably other potential amendments to the charter that we need to consider. There are several things in the charter that are outdated. I don't know, did anyone here know of anything that absolutely we need to be looking at in the charter for amendment? If not, we will bring this back at a later meeting of the governance committee. And we can go through the charter prior to that meeting and see if there are any changes that we absolutely need to make. And with that, I will open it up for public comment. Please come up, if you would like to make public comment, please come up to the mic so that we can hear you.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave, and I have realized that every mayor I have served on is on here today, except for Mayor Blaylock, but he was vice mayor when I was on my council with Farini and Blaylock. So I've worked with everyone. I totally agree with everything that was said. I respect the cost of running. I do believe, though, that once you get your signs, it's really the knowledge of how to purchase things ahead of time. So it's almost an education seminar that if you get your signs that just say running for city council, they can be used year after year, that kind of thing, which makes the cost as you get going and longer in it a lot less. I do appreciate the fact that there are concerns about having people from different wards. However, I can tell you that my first year, everyone was from Ward 4. And I and Assistant Mayor Blaylock at the time were the only ones from Ward 5. So as someone who ran as an unknown, I find that it kind of comes up with causes. When Mayor Spears and I got on our first year, it was because of the middle school. And the people support us. So I think it's really understanding the causes. I think in all these causes that push people on to council or getting people involved, the reason there were so many people in Ward 5 is because people did not want to have a brewery over in Ward 5 or 4, so everyone ran for Ward 4. So I think people run and get involved and get supported by causes, and I think the causes tend to be community causes. It's not a ward cause. The middle school is a community cause. The pub over there, when they were going to do a brewery over off of Lafayette, it was a community cause between Ward 3 and 4 and Ward 2. They all were involved, and that's why those were the people. So it's not, yes, is there a problem with a road in my area? Yes. But I can tell you the other night, coming from Ward 5, I was the only one here for Sagamore with Petra Huda, and I know Paige Trace was online. So we were here supporting our neighbors, and that's what this is all about. And I see the big cities. I work in other communities. I have worked in Dover and saw what that was. And people only supported their little neck of the woods. And keeping it the way it is, I know I've fought for years to keep it this way because it keeps coming up once in a while, makes us really think about Portsmouth. And I think that's what we're all here for. I'm not here for 41 Pickering Ave, but I'm here for Portsmouth. So I am glad to hear. I was a little worried. I was on school vacation, so I was able to get here today. I was a little worried about what I might hear today, and I really appreciate what everyone has said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Zelita Morgan, Richards Avenue. Thank you for your time. Thanks for everyone who has been here and sharing your thoughts, former mayors and everyone else. I just want to make a very overall comment here. I hear the chair, emphasizing the representation, engagement, but let's talk about what I witnessed on the first meeting I attended remotely of this committee. We're talking about governance, right? We're talking about a government, and you cannot talk about a government without talking about the people who elect the government. So the first meeting I attended, there was no quorum of the city councils attending. And there were no residents present. It's a meeting on Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We're meeting on a Friday. You are having this discussion on a Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning on a vacation week. I think on matters of governance, we should start from bottom up. We should start from actually listening to people. So you may have already had, oh, these are good ideas, and I'm not disputing, is this a good idea or not? What I am saying, the thought I want to say here, if we are talking about a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, and if you are councilors individually representing this model of democratic governance, right, I think the people are missing. And you should actually create a forum. Like, you all have these ideas running. You have been talking among yourselves, no problem whatsoever. But I think right now you should have a group to facilitate a conversation with the voters. Those are the people. Those are the people who are going to be governed. And those ideas should be vetted, talked, and discussed. And you all should hear from them. And we also should hear from everyone of our residents, our neighbors. So I want to put this information there. I don't have specific comments at this time about specific topics, but I just want to say that a governance, that discussion that takes place so insulated, it's originated within the council, it's led by the council, and it's very much goes back to the council, where the people who will be voting will have probably 2 weeks or 3 weeks to, think about this. And actually no chance to listen to themselves, amongst themselves, discuss amongst themselves, and give you the benefit of listening truly in quality from what they have to say. I want to say that doesn't disqualify and I don't want to take the merit or credit from anything that has been said here from former mayors or anyone else prior from other meetings. This is just my take. By listening to people, I still listen from people, right? So you can empower people or not. If you really have a representative government, so I think that we have to shift, because right now we have an upside down pineapple cake here. So I would appreciate you taking that into consideration, and as you are deliberating, as you are considering major changes, you are talking about little things here, not little things. And the governed is nowhere here. Can you tell me, when you were talking about councils going to the neighborhoods over there, what about having this conversation at a time when people actually can attend, can express themselves, creating forums and times where everyone can say, let's talk about it, So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for thinking of governance. But please, let's rethink how we are addressing governance by actually including those, and those are the governed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Mahana?
Morning, everybody. Greg Mahana from 3 Pheasant Lane. Thanks for having the discussion. I hope everybody focuses on the big picture here. The former mayor's had a lot of good information. I agree with some of the things that Kate said. I was the only guy that ran in Ward 4 last November. And so that, I think, should bring an interesting perspective. It's interesting that Esther said, Ward 4 carried one time when there was a big project, the brewery that nobody wanted. But after stumping in Ward 4, a lot of people felt underrepresented there. Everybody's talked about that. And didn't win, no big deal. But as recently as yesterday, I got a second call in 30 days to go meet with people in Ward 4, my neighbors in Elwyn Park, about issues. Group of people really don't want the speed bumps over there by Don Darrow School. Another fellow who's 93 years old wants me to help him move some street signs around. And he's a very tenacious guy, so I have to go talk to him. And that's what you do. But Kate kind of talked about the demographics out there, and in both places, Elwyn Park has retirees, so that gentleman certainly doesn't want to come speak to council. And the other part is all the young families there who, I have to guess, I'm not a statistician, but most of them are probably both working parents, little kids. I mean, between getting home from work and trying to make meals and pick up the bicycles and all the stuff that I see in Elwyn Park, they don't have the time or the resources to participate on council or come to these kind of meetings. So I'll roll that forward to Jack. I wasn't aware, but I think that's the best idea in the room, is to have somebody assigned to communicate with these little neighborhoods. They're cliquey, but that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's not a good thing either. They're kind of funny in Elwyn Park. I live sort of kind of, well, I live behind where St. James Church used to be. So I'm in a little foreign island there. It's a private road. It's not part of the Woodlands, and it's not part of Elmwood Park. The Woodlands wouldn't let me join their oil co-op, and the Elmwood Park folks won't let me join their Facebook page. But I'm in both of those neighborhoods, and I touched it was easy to walk them because I could walk out of my house and hit the whole neighborhood. So I hit both the Woodlands and Elmwood Park and learned all about it. And I think having some way to have a counselor or somebody assigned by council to reach out to each of the different wards and or demographics to have their thoughts brought in to the process without really thinking that they're going to come in and do it themselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Coe? I just wanted to ask you, could I be excused just for a little bio break?
Yes, go ahead. Do we have more public comment?
My name is Liza Hewitt, and I live at 726 Middle Road. I've never been a counselor. I've never run for the council, and to be honest with you, I would never want to. I give all of you people credit. It's not my thing, but I do try to stay involved. I guess you could say I'm just a resident. When I go into the polls, I vote for people. I don't vote for where they live. I don't really care where they live. I vote for who I like, who I like what they stand for, who I like what they say. I want to know they're approachable. And I guess I kind of worry about the fact that to go this direction means that if I have a concern, I'm sort of maybe encouraged or bound to seek out that person in my ward that was voted in to represent me, whether or not they represent me. Just because I live in their ward doesn't mean they represent me. And when I look with a concern, I look at the council and I look at who I can go to because I feel comfortable talking to them, because I feel comfortable with what they stand for, who they are as people. That's who I'll go to. And I don't want to have to go to somebody that was voted into my ward because that's where they live, because I don't think that they may necessarily represent me. I go to people because of who they are. And so I think that it's the wrong direction to move. I also am not in favor of putting it on the ballot for the sake of putting it on the ballot, as Mr. Denton suggested. I just think it muddies the water. I think that we have far more important things at this point that do need to be addressed. I think the CIP is one of them. I think that looking at that, people have brought it up before. It's a very kind of closed, secretive society with the CIP, it feels like, as a resident. I would like to see that be much more brought out into the public and be able to be viewed by the public and be set up in a way that the public can understand it. I think that that would take care of a lot of those concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any further public comment? Is there, oh, good, okay.
Peter Huda, 280 South Street, former counselor. I'd like to thank all the mayors for coming in and discussing this, and it seems we did full circle and got back to where we are. So I would just like to add that what we have works very well. And we have, I don't know how many years of proof here. So just because it's time to look at this doesn't mean we have to change anything. I think it's great that it was brought forward and thought about and thought through by this council. And I support open and clear discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no one else in the room. Do you want?
I will.
Okay.
Not to be left out. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak. Paige Trace, 27 Hancock Street, past city councilor. This is quite a treat to see so many past mayors all in one room and online, past Mayor Beckstead. Councilor Denton, thank you for bringing this up. Thank you for making it public. As Mayor Farini said, it takes courage to bring up new and different ideas. We don't know until we discuss and we try. However, I look at the situation and I say, Councilor Denton, if I wanted to talk about conservation or electric charging stations or making the planet better, I'd come to you. I probably wouldn't go to Councilor Tabor. No offense, Councilor Tabor. Councilor Lombardi, if I wanted to discuss historic preservation, I'd be knocking on your door, obviously. So, as a resident, as thankfully this year not someone on council, I look at the council as a collective group of great, unique, different minds with different experiences and different abilities. And that's what matters to me. I don't care, Councilor Denton, where you live. I don't care, Councilor Tabor, where you live. I care about what you know and how you can help Portsmouth. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters to me. And I thank you all very, very much for your time. Thank you to city staff also.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom that is hoping to make a comment?
Just the mayor.
Okay. If not, then we will go ahead and close public comment. Is there any other business that we need to discuss today? No? Okay. The next meeting, I should say, is of this group is currently scheduled for, well, actually, I should say our next meeting is scheduled for the 16th of May. So we have a bit of a break. I think that was designed initially when we discussed meeting as a group. We designed that around budget discussions because we have quite a number of city council meetings in that first few weeks of May. Is May the 16th a good date still? Okay. And at that next meeting, we will be continuing our discussions of any other potential changes to the rules. We'll also be discussing committees, is my understanding. And if there's anything that the counselors on the committee would like to make sure we address, please let me know so that I can place those items on the agenda. With that said, thank you all for coming again. Thank you to our former mayors for showing up and speaking to us today. It was really insightful. Thank you to our city clerk for attending and city attorney as well. And thank you for all the comments from our residents and many former city councilors. That is also very much appreciated. And thank you, Mayor Beckstead, for pausing your vacation for a few minutes. I do sincerely appreciate that. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.